The possibility of my safety has never been so clear. And to make matters worse, I'm not alone.
I've stumbled into a potential man-eater.
It's got to be a good 20 foot long, 3 times the length of me.
For nearly a decade, Jeremy Wade took us to the edge of the world's deadliest rivers, pulling legends from the depths and facing dangers most of us could only imagine. Then, without warning, river monsters vanished from our screens. Fans were told it was the natural end of the adventure. But was it really? Now, at 69, Wade has finally broken his silence. And what he reveals about why the show ended is far more shocking than anyone expected. The birth of a phenomenon. Before Jeremy Wade became a household name, he lived a life that was adventurous but far from television fame. For nearly 2 decades, he worked as a biology teacher, most notably in Kent, England, and later even abroad in places like Sudan and India. Teaching gave him stability, but Wade was the first to admit it was never his ultimate calling. He once said that while he enjoyed sharing knowledge with students, the classroom could not compete with the pull of the wild. He described teaching as a means to an end, a way to fund his expeditions, buy equipment, and keep his adventurous spirit alive when he wasn't out on rivers. His true passion, he confessed, lay not in textbooks, but in uncovering mysteries hidden in the waterways of the world. Even while balancing his teaching duties, Wade never stopped traveling. He used long holidays and every break to venture into remote places, seeking out rivers where danger and folklore flowed together. In these regions, the people he met often had startling stories to share. Fishermen, village elders, and local guides recounted terrifying incidents that blurred the line between myth and reality. There were tales of giant fish capable of swallowing dogs whole, of people pulled beneath the surface by unseen forces, and of mysterious injuries that could not be explained. Many described disappearances where the river was the only suspect. Unlike outsiders who might dismiss such accounts as superstition, Wade listened carefully. With the mind of a scientist and the curiosity of an adventurer, he recorded every story in detail. Over time, he built a kind of living library, a catalog of global freshwater legends stretching from South America to Africa to Asia. Each entry in his growing collection deepened his conviction that beneath these murky waters lay truths stranger than fiction. The turning point came in 2007, when Wade's relentless search for answers nearly cost him his life. While on an expedition, he contracted a severe case of malaria. The illness struck with brutal force, leaving him bedridden and weak. For weeks, he hovered between life and death, and even after surviving, his recovery was painfully slow. Yet this period of forced rest became an unexpected gift. Stripped of his ability to travel and fish, Wade turned inward, using his convalescence to reflect on the decades of notes, journals, and strange encounters he had collected. It was in this vulnerable time that the idea for river monsters began to take shape. Wade envisioned a television series that would merge his scientific background with the raw thrill of adventure. Unlike other fishing programs, which often sensationalized their stories, his show would stand apart by blending 3 powerful elements. First, a detective-style investigation into real-life mysteries. Second, the challenge of extreme angling in environments where failure, and even death, was a possibility. And third, the inclusion of authentic local voices, giving cultural weight and context to each mystery. Wade wanted the series to be both thrilling and truthful, solving puzzles of nature without resorting to exaggeration. That vision became a reality on April 5, 2009, when River Monsters premiered on Animal Planet. The debut season, filmed largely in the Amazon basin, introduced audiences to legendary species like the Paraiba catfish and the Arapaima, creatures shrouded in centuries of folklore. Wade approached each case like a detective, interviewing witnesses, analyzing evidence, and then embarking on perilous attempts to locate and capture the suspected culprit. The format was unlike anything viewers had seen before. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the end of its first season, River Monsters had become Animal Planet's highest-rated series, averaging more than 1.3 million viewers per episode in the United States alone. Viewers were hooked not only by the suspense of each mystery, but also by Wade himself. His calm, methodical approach, coupled with his respect for both the creatures and the communities he encountered, distinguished him from other television hosts. Scientists praised the show's accuracy, while general audiences loved its sense of discovery. Yet behind the camera, even in these early days of success, troubling realities were beginning to take shape, expanding the hunt. By 2011, River Monsters had grown into far more than a television show about fishing. It had become a global expedition, a hunt for answers stretching across continents and through some of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Jeremy Wade and his crew were no longer confined to the Amazon or South America. The success of the early seasons gave them the opportunity and the responsibility to search farther and deeper than ever before. Each new location brought fresh mysteries, and with them, new dangers. That year, the series pushed into the turbulent waters of the Congo River in Central Africa, one of the world's deepest and most unpredictable waterways. The Congo is notorious for its treacherous currents and for harboring species that can rival the size and strength of anything found in the Amazon. For Wade, it was the perfect stage for his investigations, but for the crew, it was a logistical nightmare. Transporting gear through the jungle, navigating political red tape, and staying safe in an unpredictable environment tested everyone involved. The reward, however, was undeniable. Audiences were captivated, and River Monsters was now firmly established as a truly international production. The adventures did not stop there. Soon, Wade was scaling the icy foothills of the Himalayas in search of creatures that thrived in the cold, high-altitude rivers. The contrast was dramatic. One season might find him waist-deep in muddy, insect-infested waters, and the next shivering in glacial streams surrounded by snow-capped peaks. This variety was part of what made the show so compelling. Each episode was not only a biological mystery, but also a cultural journey into the lives of the people who depended on these rivers for survival. Among all these expeditions, one of the most unforgettable took place in Southeast Asia, where Wade pursued the giant freshwater stingray. This extraordinary animal, known locally as Himantara, can reach lengths of more than 15 feet and weigh several hundred kilograms. Capturing it on camera was not a matter of luck. It required days of grueling work in punishing heat, endless patience, and a deep collaboration with local fishermen. Wade often described this hunt as one of the most intense challenges of his career. When the stingray finally revealed itself, thrashing against the line with enormous strength, the footage became iconic. It was not just a triumph of angling, but of endurance, determination, and the delicate partnership between man and nature. As the seasons continued, the show ventured into even more difficult terrain. In 2012, Wade and his team journeyed to Guyana, a remote land of dense rainforest and winding rivers. Just reaching the fishing sites required days of travel by dugout canoe. Equipment had to be carried through thick jungle, exposed to constant rain and mud. Communication with the outside world was almost non-existent. For the crew, this was not just an adventure, but a test of survival. Weather delays, mechanical failures, and physical exhaustion piled on top of the already enormous task of capturing compelling footage. Many viewers sitting at home had no idea of the extraordinary effort it took just to get a single scene on film. By this time, episodes were becoming longer and more demanding to produce. What once could be filmed in a few weeks began to stretch into 2 months or more. The search for each river monster required extensive planning, complicated permits, and an ever-growing logistical team. With every new season, the expectations from the audience increased, pushing Wade and his crew to take on challenges that grew more extreme. But while viewers saw Jeremy Wade as a calm, determined figure unraveling mysteries in exotic rivers, behind the scenes, the reality was very different. The pace was beginning to wear on the people who made the show possible. Long days of travel, endless hours on rivers with no guarantee of success, and the constant pressure to deliver results created a heavy burden. Crew members were often pushed to their physical and mental limits. By the show's 7th season in 2015, some of the long-standing team members had stepped away entirely, citing exhaustion and the difficulty of sustaining such a punishing schedule. Each new location demanded more from the crew, more from the host, and more from the river itself. The excitement of discovery was still there, but so too was the quiet, creeping realization that the cost of these hunts was mounting. As the hunts grew tougher, the risks to Jeremy Wade and his crew escalated, nearly turning deadly. The physical and emotional toll. By the time River Monsters reached its middle seasons, the show had already pushed Jeremy Wade and his crew into some of the most remote and unforgiving environments on Earth. To audiences at home, the episodes looked thrilling, filled with tense hunts, dramatic captures, and fascinating discoveries. But what viewers rarely saw was the heavy toll behind. Jeremy Wade himself was no stranger to danger. His career had always required physical resilience, but the demands of filming year after year brought near-death experiences that scarred both body and mind. One of the most serious incidents occurred while filming in the Congo. Jeremy contracted a severe case of malaria, a disease that claims countless lives in the region every year. He later admitted how close he came to not surviving, saying he very nearly joined those who lose the battle to the disease daily. The recovery was slow and grueling, yet instead of stopping, he pushed forward, determined not to let the illness end his mission. Another terrifying encounter came during his pursuit of the massive arapaima in the Amazon. These giant fish are armored with thick scales and have the power to leap and thrash with incredible force. In one shocking moment, an arapaima struck Jeremy directly in the chest. The impact was so violent that he compared it to being hit by a horse. For weeks afterwards, the pain lingered, a constant reminder that his work was far more than just a television performance. It was survival in the face of nature's raw power. Yet, perhaps the most frightening brush with death came in the form of an electric eel. While diving, Wade risked coming into close contact with a creature capable of delivering a 500-volt shock. In water, such a jolt can mean paralysis, and paralysis underwater can mean drowning. The danger was not hypothetical. It was very real, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Jeremy faced the possibility that the eel's defense mechanism might end his life right there in the river. The dangers did not stop with Jeremy. His crew, often working just off camera, faced their own moments of peril. One of the most chilling incidents happened when a sound technician was struck by lightning during a shoot. The bolt hit with devastating force, scorching his legs and leaving the entire team in shock. Jeremy later described it as one of the most sobering moments of the show, a reminder that even the best planning could not protect them from the unpredictable wrath of nature. Beyond these dramatic accidents, the day-to-day grind was equally punishing. Long filming days stretched up to 14 hours. They worked through monsoon rains, scorching sun, and icy riverbanks. Meals were irregular, rest was scarce, and travel across continents became routine, leaving no time to recover before the next dangerous assignment. The relentless pace slowly wore the crew down. The same men and women who had once been energized by the thrill of discovery now felt the crushing weight of fatigue. By season 7 in 2015, some longtime crew members had quietly stepped away. Their departures were rarely acknowledged publicly, but those close to production understood the reasons. Burnout, physical exhaustion, and the mental strain of constant risk had simply become too much. For those who remained, the absence of experienced colleagues added even more pressure, stretching the team thinner with each expedition. Jeremy himself was not immune to these pressures. Now in his early 60s, he began to feel the creeping limits of his endurance. Decades of traveling, hauling gear, battling monstrous fish, and enduring harsh climates had taken their toll. Though he rarely showed weakness on camera, he later admitted that the accumulation of injuries, illnesses, and endless fatigue had left its mark. He described it as something you don't realize while you're still in the middle of it. Only when you stop do you feel the full weight of what your body has endured, and by then, something deep inside has already changed. Even as Jeremy's health and safety were tested, a bigger problem loomed. The monsters themselves were running out of monsters. By 2015, river monsters had achieved what no other wildlife program had done on such a global scale. Jeremy Wade had traveled across 6 continents, investigating more than 100 species of dangerous and mysterious freshwater fish. From the mighty Arapaima of the Amazon to the Goliath tigerfish of the Congo, he had brought creatures once spoken of only in folklore into the bright light of television. Viewers watched in awe as myths turned into biological reality. Yet with every new season, a difficult question began to grow louder. How many monsters were left to find? The first seasons of the show thrived on novelty. Each episode introduced audiences to something they had never seen before, an extraordinary fish with a terrifying reputation. But by its later years, the production team faced a mounting problem. The world's great rivers had already yielded their most dramatic secrets. Wade had caught many of the largest and most dangerous freshwater species alive, documented their behaviors, and solved the mysteries behind countless chilling local legends. Finding something equally shocking to top the previous discoveries was becoming increasingly difficult. As the list of never-before-seen creatures shrank, the series began revisiting earlier locations and familiar species. On the surface, these episodes still held tension and danger. Wade would return to places like the Amazon or the Mekong, but instead of chasing an entirely new predator, he would investigate a different aspect of a species already featured. Perhaps he would search in a different part of the river or uncover a new legend tied to the same fish. For Wade, these return journeys offered a chance to deepen the story and present new scientific insights. But for longtime fans, the repetition raised suspicions. Online forums and social media buzzed with speculation. Some viewers began to wonder if Wade and his crew had simply run out of monsters. They noted patterns, pointing out that episodes seemed to echo earlier ones, or that certain species reappeared under slightly different angles. To many, it felt as though the show had reached its natural endpoint, having already captured nearly every freshwater giant worth pursuing. The magic of constant discovery, they feared, was slipping away. Jeremy Wade, however, resisted the temptation to stage or exaggerate. In interviews, he was clear that authenticity was non-negotiable. He knew the easiest path forward would be to invent new dangers or embellish legends for the sake of drama. But he refused. The integrity of river monsters was built on truth, on showing the real risks of these environments and the real animals that lived within them. To compromise that, Wade believed, would betray both science and the audience's trust. He once remarked that if they ever started inventing danger, the entire purpose of the show would collapse. Yet behind Wade's firm commitment to honesty, other pressures were beginning to weigh on him, pressures he chose not to share with the public at the time. Some were personal, a growing awareness of the physical toll the show was taking on his health. Others were environmental, as he began to notice alarming changes in the rivers themselves. Places that once teemed with life were showing signs of decline. Fish populations were shrinking, water quality was deteriorating, and the cultural stories that had inspired river monsters were slowly being replaced with a quieter, more unsettling reality. Rivers that no longer held their monsters at all. But the shortage of monsters wasn't the only problem. The network that hosted river monsters was also changing its course. The network shift. By 2016, the television landscape was changing. Animal Planet, the network that had carried river monsters to global fame, was undergoing a quiet but dramatic transformation. The channel, once home to daring adventure documentaries and gritty wildlife series, began to steer in a very different direction. Executives at Discovery Communications, Animal Planet's parent company, wanted programming that appealed to broader audiences, shows that were lighter, warmer, and far less risky. Instead of treacherous expeditions into crocodile-filled rivers or remote jungles, they envisioned family-friendly content, the kind that could be played in living rooms without stirring too much anxiety. Pets, veterinarians, and soft wildlife storytelling became the network's new focus. For a show like River Monsters, this shift was nothing short of a looming crisis. Jeremy Wade's program was built on unpredictability. Every episode involved international travel, permits, delays, and the very real possibility that a target species might never appear on camera. These challenges made the series unique, but they also made it costly and difficult to manage. Reports suggest that some episodes exceeded $500,000 to produce, a figure that placed River Monsters among the most expensive projects on the channel. In an era where networks were tightening budgets and seeking consistency, the price tag alone made Wade's show a target for scrutiny. This was not just an Animal Planet issue. Across the television industry, there was a growing reluctance to invest in high-stakes adventure documentaries. Networks had begun favoring formats that were cheaper, faster, and easier to control. Studio-based shows could be filmed in weeks, at a fraction of the cost, without the risk of equipment being lost in the jungle or crew members struck by lightning in a storm. The unpredictability that gave River Monsters its authenticity was the very thing that made executives uneasy. Inside the production team, the change was felt immediately. Proposals for new expeditions, once approved with enthusiasm, began meeting resistance. Budgets were slashed, and suggestions for more remote or ambitious locations were met with cautious hesitation. Meetings that once buzzed with excitement about venturing into uncharted waters now carried a different tone, one dominated by cost calculations, risk assessments, and doubts. Crew members quietly noted the shift. It was clear that the network's priorities were moving away from shows like theirs. For Jeremy Wade, this was a new kind of challenge. On camera, he remained the calm and determined host, but behind the scenes, he was navigating a shrinking space for the kind of storytelling he believed in. He had always approached River Monsters with scientific integrity, refusing to exaggerate or stage drama. But when budgets tightened and pressure mounted, questions arose about whether the show could maintain its authenticity under new constraints. For Wade, compromising the truth was not an option. If the series could not continue in its original spirit, then perhaps it should not continue at all. When the end of River Monsters was announced, the explanation given to the public was simple and elegant. Wade explained that the subject matter was finite, that after 10 years he had checked off every item on his mental list of river monsters. It was, on the surface, a logical and even satisfying conclusion. Fans accepted it as the natural closing of a remarkable journey. After all, how long could such a show go on without repeating itself? When River Monsters returned in 2017 for its final season, Fans thought it was just the natural end of an adventure. But Wade knew the truth was far more unsettling: the final season and farewell. When river monsters returned to Animal Planet in April 2017, fans had no reason to believe they were witnessing the beginning of the end. The network gave little indication that this season would be different. There were no grand marketing campaigns, no farewell tours, and no public statements announcing that the journey was coming to a close. The show slipped back onto screens as though it were simply another chapter in Jeremy Wade's long pursuit of the world's freshwater mysteries. But those who watched closely began to sense something was changing. The season began with Killers from the Abyss and concluded in May with Malaysian Lake Monster. On the surface, the formula remained the same: local legends, investigative fieldwork, and the high-stakes pursuit of elusive creatures. Yet, the tone carried a new weight. Where earlier seasons brimmed with urgency and the thrill of discovery, these final episodes felt more reflective, as though Wade himself knew the book was closing. He seemed more deliberate, more contemplative, often emphasizing lessons learned rather than building toward suspenseful revelations. For longtime fans, this subtle shift was easy to miss. But for those who had followed Wade since the beginning, it was unmistakable. There was a quiet sense of farewell woven into every scene. Publicly, Wade gave a simple and satisfying explanation for the show's conclusion. After nearly a decade of travel, research, and exhausting hunts, he explained that his mental checklist of monsters had been completed. 10 years ago, I had this list in my head, he said. Everything has now been ticked off and then some. It was the kind of statement that felt natural and logical. Audiences accepted it as the graceful ending of a journey that could never go on forever. How many new legends could remain after covering more than 100 species across 6 continents? To most, the decision seemed inevitable, but acceptance did not make the farewell any easier. As the final episodes aired, fans flooded social media with messages of gratitude and grief. Viewers spoke of watching with their families, of children who had grown up alongside Wade's adventures, and of the inspiration the show had given them to explore nature for themselves. Many credited river monsters with sparking their interest in biology, conservation, or adventure. For others, the show had been more than entertainment. It was a ritual, a dependable reminder that the world still held mysteries worth chasing. The outpouring of emotion revealed just how deeply Wade's calm narration and relentless curiosity had connected with audiences. Behind the scenes, the mood was far heavier. The production crew, many of whom had traveled alongside Wade for years, knew the decision had already been made long before the season aired. For them, these final expeditions were not just episodes, but goodbyes to a way of life. They had braved lightning storms, dangerous waters, grueling days, and endless logistical headaches. Now, after years of sacrifice, the adventure was drawing to a close. For Wade himself, it was an ending wrapped in conflicting emotions. The work had been exhausting, often punishing, yet it had also been the realization of a lifelong dream. To walk away from it meant leaving behind a part of himself. The quiet nature of the farewell left many viewers unsettled. Other long-running programs often conclude with special episodes, interviews, or celebratory recaps. River Monsters simply faded out, its curtain call disguised as another season. To casual watchers, it might have seemed like business as usual. But for those invested, the lack of fanfare hinted at something unspoken. Why end one of Animal Planet's most successful shows with such little ceremony? Why no proper goodbye to the millions who had tuned in for nearly a decade? Jeremy Wade's official explanation that the world's monsters had finally been catalogued was believable. It aligned with the premise of the series and gave closure to a decade of storytelling. Yet it was only part of the truth. What Wade held back at the time, what he chose not to share with the public until later, was a revelation far more unsettling than simply running out of creatures to chase. The final season of River Monsters may have closed the book on the hunt for freshwater giants, but it opened a larger and darker question. What was happening to the rivers themselves, the very environments that had made the show possible? And what truths was Wade holding back from his devoted audience? When he finally broke his silence, Jeremy revealed a shocking truth, not about the monsters, but about the rivers themselves. The real reason and Wade's new mission. For years, fans of River Monsters accepted Jeremy Wade's explanation that the show had ended because the supply of giant freshwater creatures had simply run out. It was a clean, elegant answer, and one that made perfect sense given the show's premise. But years after the final season aired, Wade finally began to reveal the deeper, more troubling truth. The monsters themselves were not disappearing because they had all been found. They were disappearing because their homes, the rivers of the world, were dying. The success of River Monsters brought global attention to species that were rare and often vulnerable. But publicity is a double-edged sword. While it raised awareness, it also risked inspiring illegal fishing and poaching. Wade began to question whether the very act of showcasing these creatures could unintentionally put them in greater danger. As conservation issues became more urgent, the idea of catching monsters for the camera began to feel less like a triumph and more like a risk he could not ignore. Faced with these realities, Wade decided it was time to shift his mission. The thrill of hunting legends had defined River Monsters, but the greater story was no longer about what lurked beneath the surface. It was about whether those rivers could survive at all. After the show ended, Wade returned to television with a new purpose. In 2018, he launched Mighty Rivers, a series that explored the health of some of the world's most important waterways, including the Ganges, Mississippi, and Yangtze. Rather than focusing on mysterious creatures, he investigated how pollution, industrial development, and climate change were eroding river ecosystems. The tone was less sensational but far more urgent. The following year, Wade continued this work with Dark Waters, another series that delved into overlooked aquatic threats. This time, the focus was on invasive species, ecological collapses, and hidden dangers that many people never considered. Both projects showed a clear evolution in Wade's mission. He was no longer asking what monster might be lurking in the depths. Instead, he was asking why the rivers themselves were under attack and what humanity could do before it was too late. Do you agree with Wade's new mission, or do you wish the show had continued? Share your thoughts in the comments below.